Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalrin, and today I want to revisit the global cooldown shenanigans going over on the alpha. I originally made a video talking about global cooldown and how they're changing the global cooldown in BFA. I asked you guys what were your thoughts on the GCD change. The initial GCD change changed the massive big cooldowns that everybody would pop in PvP and PvE and toss those abilities on the global cooldown. That means abilities like Combustion, Adrenaline Rush, Vendetta, Shadow Blades, Battle Cry, Paladin Wings, Incarnation, all those abilities that offer you a massive buff to your damage are now on the global cooldown. Majority of you guys in the comments were actually pretty happy about this change. From a PvP perspective, strictly PvP perspective, this slows down the gameplay a little, but it allows a lot more players a lot more reaction time in PvP based situations. So no longer will you have a situation where a warrior charges you, stuns you, and then blows you up in literally less than a second. You will now be able to see his cooldowns coming up and you'll have more time to react. So a lot of you guys thought this was a good change to be able to have more time to react for PvP based situations. After that, I kind of just shelved the topic. I didn't really mind it. I guess if everybody's happy, that's fine. Maybe it'll be better for the game, but I didn't really know how it is. I'm not on the alpha. I can't test these kind of things. But I feel like by the end of this video, I'm never going to be ever even considered for an alpha, let alone a beta or any early version of World of Warcraft. I think I'm just digging my own grave, but I feel this video needs to be made. I have been paying attention to what is going on though as of recent, with a couple videos and forum posts and people talking about the global cooldown that is coming out in BFA, and I'm just not quite sure how I feel about it anymore. A lot of people are coming out and are saying they don't like it. Some people say, like Mike Preach WoW says, about 90% of the people on the alpha don't like the change in BFA for global cooldown. And the problem is not just for the big button abilities. They're not just putting your big button abilities on a global cooldown. They're now even doubling down on it. After hearing the initial outcry from the community, they decided to throw even more abilities on a global cooldown. Now, I know you're all rushing to check out the forum post and read it for yourselves, but I found a video that gives you a pretty good TLDR of what the forum post looks like in a video format.
Seconds
Charge
GCD.
0.5
Soul
seconds
barrier
GCD.
1.5 seconds
Charged up
GCD.
1.5
Corpse
seconds
shield
GCD.
1.5 seconds GCD.
Charged
Soul barrier 1.5 seconds GCD.
Stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more. Where the fuck are your parents? I'm gonna call Child Protective Services. It's time to stop!
Thought it was just a lag on my FuryWarrior. Didn't even notice the GCD change, but it makes things extremely clunky for a class like that, which has several short cooldowns. This definitely should have been done on a class-by-class basis. Fury and some of the other specs rely on having a high amount of burst in the opener. That's all Fury is. You have your burst and then 0 damage. Burst and 0 damage, and that averages out to a decent number. And then during the execute is when you can really pop off. Especially the longer the fight lasts, the more damage you can really essentially do. But the burst aspect of Fury and the idea that they need to combine cooldowns together is essential to the spec. Without this change, you are punishing the spec for the way you're supposed to play it, which is maximum damage in the opener. And I feel like they would have to fundamentally change the spec overall, do a big class change if they are going to implement this. Also, pacing, resource cap, and abilities like Energize and Elixir is on the global cooldown is going to make it inherently that much worse compared to other talents in its row. For classes that rely on synchronizing or desynchronizing cooldowns, in particular classes that already have heavy use of GCD, this is going to be detrimental to the gameplay. I have tried this out on a few classes now, and I must say it feels really bad. It makes combat feel clunky and punishes you for taking active abilities or playing classes with several cooldowns. Classes with fewer offensive CDs actively feel better to play now by comparison, and there's nothing the player with dense CDs classes can do about it besides reroll or pick different talents. I always said I'm not a huge fan of passives, especially in PvP. Like for example, Auto Bubble I thought was just ridiculous. A bubble should be an ability that a paladin has to press, like an ice block, like a disperse. Should we have an auto ice block? Should we have an auto disperse? Even the idea of an auto trinket I think is silly. I think it basically, what you're going to end up doing is players that are choosing to go for easier abilities that are passive, abilities that don't actually you need to press, that don't affect your gameplay in major ways, those players are getting rewarded, and players that are choosing to add an extra ability into the rotation to weave it or even to make it more complicated, to add a timer to watch out for, those players are going to be punished because now they have to deal with the GCD. So the easier you're making your class to play, the simpler it is to play your class, the more passives you can go for, so you can avoid all those active buttons, the better your class performs. I don't really like that idea. I've enjoyed the Legion pacing of combat, and I can't see any of these combat changes being positive. Forcing people to waste an entire GCD for a buff that's going to have a wasted second isn't fun. If this change you feel is needed for PvP content, by all means add it to the templates and test. I just don't see a reason to slow down rotation and bring it back to BC era combat. If I wanted to fall asleep during combat, I'd be playing Final Fantasy XIV. Might as well increase the GCD up to 3 seconds while we're at it. I can see both sides of the argument, however, after playing this for a few hours this way, I think this is a bad idea for one reason. It's not fun. Standing there or attacking while you hit multiple cooldowns is a little bit annoying and kind of frustrating, and is just not fun. Few points. Yes, one, I think if they are gonna put our abilities on GCD, they should at least refund us an extra second. So at least if we are gonna press it, at least we'll have the full duration of that ability. By adding the extra second, you're counting the GCD. You're still slowing down the gameplay to the fact that we do have to set a GCD, but then we still have the use of our ability. Because then it makes that whole duration of that ability and maximizing it less fun. You're taking away a second from a lot of our basic cooldowns. Unless you're going to modify them and actually extend them by a second or however many seconds, which Blizzard have done for some, but not for all of them, a lot of classes are losing a second in their burst. And yes, that Final Fantasy comment. The cooldown, the global cooldown in that game is 2.5 seconds. It feels so sluggish and you can fall asleep easily. Eventually, the classes do get better, but only at higher levels. So for the lower levels, you are snoring away. At higher levels, though, they add abilities that you can use in between global, sometimes 2 abilities. So you use global, in between, global, in between, so it doesn't really ever feel like you actually have a global. Unless Blizzard is going to add a bunch of in-between abilities, which they're taking those that already exist and are adding them to the global, you are overall going to slow down the rotation, which I don't agree with. DPS CDs on a GCD doesn't feel really good. Blizzard forcing and interrupting of an otherwise smooth rotation isn't interesting, it's irritating. If you want to add interesting choices, unprune some utility spells. Feels like a step backward. If you want to experience right now in Legion how that's going to feel, go to the Quartermaster and buy Detection macro. Detection is just a spell that you would usually just use as a throwaway in a dungeon vault of the Wardens, where the boss will channel a spell and the next ability you use will lock you out and put a cooldown on it. Detection basically just takes up a global of what you have for your rogues. When you hit it, all the other abilities get into a global. So what you do is you macro it together with other abilities that are not in the global. When you have abilities like Symbols of Death, Detection, Symbols of Death, you can make exact same macro, you can adjust it for Crimson Vial. Just if you're not in the alpha, you can really get a taste of what it's like to play. Symbols of Death is one of those abilities you weave in between your rotations, so it's one of those abilities that makes the Subtlety Rogue, for example, feel faster. You already have a global cooldown, and it's very low global cooldown because Rogues is generally just a faster class. You don't have to wait quite as long. You get to sync a lot more abilities at the enemy. But to be able to weave this ability in between of the abilities like Shadow Strike, Symbols of Death, Shadow Strike, works so well because the Shadow Strike will take 40 energy, you get that 40 energy back, you get another 40 energy free, and you also get to weave in the 50% damage into your burst. But right now, if you were to try it, it feels so clunky. Let me just go over the opener for Subtlety. Let me just go opener with PvP in PvE in mind. But now, if you look at it, Shadow Strike, bam, getting my cooldowns back up, fine. Now I need to use Symbols of Death. That gets in the way. So now I just don't have the damage. It's not quite as smooth. It definitely feels clunky. It feels like I just lost a little bit extra of that energy regen to it. I was able to more or less execute this, but now my timing is off. When I'm playing with Nightblade and trying to maximize the duration of it as much as possible, like, it just becomes completely non-viable at all. Like, for example, I'm also not great at Subtlety. I'm not trying to showcase my damage here. Shadow Strike, then I have to do this. It feels, just the amount of energy I'm getting back with Shadow Strikes and Symbols of Death is just such a nice ability to weave into your rotation in between. Though right now it feels really, really clunky. Even if you're playing for PvP, where this whole rotation is even more important, when you weave in Symbols of Death is even more important, and maximizing the globals of your character is even more important, this gets in the way. The problem with this is the whole global cooldown reduction or globals, or adding, putting more abilities onto a global, is we have already so many specializations like Subtlety that are so against the wall already. With globals, you're already trying to weave as many abilities, sync as many abilities, get as many common points, as many cooldowns, as much resources as you can out of the energy. You're trying to maximize that already. So now that you're making Symbols of Death a global cooldown, you're making this a lot harder. Now it's a question of when should we use it. Should we use it before we start the fight so we can get the 50% damage buff early and then not have to worry about it? What about the energy benefit of it? It gives you 40 energy back. It weaves so easily and seamlessly into the rotation. It is so nice. So you have to use it for later if you want to maximize it, right? But if you use it, then you're losing a moment that you normally would be spending using globals to generate compounds. Let me just give you a PvP opener. A lot of you guys would know this would like. Mark for Death, Shadow Strike, bam. And then this is where I'll go for damage, but now I'm having to force my damage back. Now my rotation is off. I wasn't able to get an extra global in there for my damage, and now my whole opener is off because I'm having to waste a global into Symbols of Death. Already with the changes for Subtlety, it looks like it might have some energy regen issues. So Blizzard will have to address these things. If they want to put this ability on a global cooldown, they'll need to redesign it so it can work with a global. Because if they just leave it as is, so it takes a global just to even use it, I don't think it'll work well for Subtlety. And I don't think it'll work for other specs in the game that rely on abilities you weave in mid-globals. And you're just taking those abilities and putting them on the global. It is intended to break CD stacking, which became a problem when Blizzard gave most classes 2 or 3 offensive CDs of the GCD. Blizz could remove extra offensive CDs and balance the ones remaining accordingly, or just put them on GCD, which requires less time and effort. With the cooldowns being on the GCD, it feels like I'm losing the GCD worth of time from the cooldown itself. If True Shot is a 15-second buff and it triggers a 1.5-second GCD, my buff really only lasts 13.5 seconds. While playing, what felt somewhat smooth before the change now feels clunky. What felt responsive now feels clunky. I'm not in the alpha, so it's not like I can really go testing things, but it's like a man who never tasted sugar. You can explain to him that sugar is sweet. Is it objectively sweet? Yeah, but how can that man know if he never tasted sugar? Therefore, sugar is not sweet? Is what I feel like a lot of people are bringing up as an argument for BFA and alpha. Just because you haven't experienced it yourself doesn't mean you can really say much about it. Good thing we can actually sort of kind of replicate it as I was able to do. From what I saw on the forums, a lot of people agree that this change feels really bad. It's not fun to play with at all. If those offensive cooldowns on GCD change goes live, the burst will either be 1. Stun the target, 2. Use offensive CDs on their own GCD, 3. Do damage during the remaining stun, 4. Follow up with remaining CC. Or 1. Use offensive CDs on their own GCD, telegraphing the incoming burst, 2. Stun the target, 3. Do damage during the stun, 4. Follow up with remaining CC. Couple points. 1. Yes, the GCD thing is going to make PvP a lot more awkward. Do you first stun, then burst? And then you're basically wasting a lot of the burst potential? Or do you tell, hey, I'm about to burst with a big old telegraph, which isn't fun, it's not even predictable. It's just you're telling an enemy, hey, I'm about to do damage, and then you stun, and then you go through cooldowns. You're taking a lot of the nuance. Usually it's a little bit of a mind game PvP. Let's say I'm a rogue and I stun the druid, and he bark skins. Did I mean to burst him, or did I just fake him out? Did I fake him out to force that bark skin so now he won't have it next time, and now as a rogue I get an up, and I'm probably more likely to win the duel, or the match, or whatever? A lot of those things are being taken out, and you're basically just like, okay, let's watch the global. Is it popping anything? No? Okay. Even somebody that is getting locked down by somebody, they stun, pop your cooldowns, waste a global, then go through your cooldown and damage. That alone sounds less dangerous, since the person that is beating on you will not keep you in stun for nearly as long of a time. PvP is supposed to be dangerous. You're supposed to be afraid for your life. You're supposed to want to fight the other faction. What if we have a situation where a priest, just a lowly priest, never done a BG before, first time stepping into the BG, first time PvP experience, gets sapped by the rogue, oh no, I'll trinket, because he freaks out. Most of us learned that you're not supposed to trinket a sap. Because a rogue sapped us, we made that mistake, we got bursted down one shot in the opener, and then we learned that mistake. A lot of us learn our mistake through PvP experiences. But now you're taking away a little bit of that authentic experience. What if the priest just doesn't get bursted? What if for the rogue it takes too long to get anything set up and the priest just makes it out with barely any sliver of health? Now it no longer feels exciting, it no longer feels dangerous. It no longer feels like it's a PvP situation. A rogue that's an assassin no longer feels like an assassin. A warrior or a paladin that stuns you full with wings doesn't feel quite as dangerous, especially if you can see it from literally a mile away. It's almost like Blizzard is trying to put training wheels on its community. on the people that play PvP, for example, which I don't think anyone asked for. Nobody's asking to be treated like a baby. On top of it, they're also applying this for PvE as well. This doesn't just affect PvP, this also affects dungeons and raids. And I'm not a huge fan of the idea of, hey, here's a thing that works for PvP or bothers PvPers, let's apply it to everywhere in the game. I'm not a huge fan of that because I feel like it's not justifiable. Because it affects PvP, let's make everybody else do it too. Your team's only concern is improving the esports viewing experience or competitive PvP, as evidenced by many comments that have no counterplay from watcher. You could enable these changes only in competitive PvP modes. I would not do this as it likely makes PvP feel just as clunky as awkward as it is making PvE feel right now. But in the end, there's no good reason given to do this for PvE. If burst is a problem in PvP, correct in that area of the game. But on a brighter note, I actually found an image of BFA, what the combat is going to look like. So we're changing the combat system of BFA to a turn-based strategy game, where you have to wait with the global cooldown before you can use any actions. Have fun. But on a serious note, I feel like I found the 2 forum posts that explain both sides pretty well. So I'm going to just list them. I'm going to list the 2 sides of the story. People that are pro GCD change and people that are against it. And you guys get to decide in the comments and let me know which ones you're with. Who are you choosing to roll with? Who do you decide? What do you like? Do you like the GCD change or do you don't? Yes, also realize that there's more skill to knowing when and in which order to use CDs than to copy paste a macro text and import into your game. This change raises the skill cap and gives the player more to do in combat. Don't like having to push a few buttons before you hit max damage potential? Then switch to a class that isn't designed to be that way. If that's not enough, this also allows for animations to play out, which is actually important for people who don't play this game as some cold statistics min-max sim, which is the vast majority of the players, by the way. The other side of the story is this. Putting defensive CDs on GCD is much worse though. Not being able to react to enemies or having to pause so that I'll be able to react is the most awkward feeling I've ever had in the game. This new wave of defensive abilities being added to the GCD is just bizarre and unwarranted. What type of player do these changes benefit? People who refuse to make macros? People with slow reaction times? People who can't judge enemy player behavior? The game should reward players willing to learn and engage in it. But these changes just invalidate all that progress. Through streams, I haven't personally seen any high-end players in either PvE or PvP who want this change. It seems out of the blue, and I have a feeling it will inevitably unravel once again over the course of the next several expansions. What I don't understand is how there's so many people that are saying, no, don't do this, and they're giving examples of this is why it's bad, this is why you shouldn't be doing this, and Blizzard is still continuing on and doubling down to adding even more abilities on GCD. So I would love for them to get some kind of response and just to see what it comes down. In the end, all I want is for BFA to be a great expansion, and I want it to be the best expansion that it can be. If this change comes out and classes are adjusted to this change, like a lot of abilities and classes are adjusted after the global cooldown, then I'm okay with it. But if you release it in its current state, I don't really know how I'd feel about it. It'd feel way too weird to have a lot of big abilities as other utility-based abilities also on the global cooldown. I feel like it would just muddy the rotation and make some specs that are currently enjoyable a lot less enjoyable. Not every spec is going to be affected by it, but I feel that warriors and rogues and just about every single class that I have under my rooftop of my account, both EU and US, I feel like a lot of those will get affected. Maybe it might be the best time to start leveling Demon Hunter, because everybody else on the forum says that those guys still feel pretty smooth compared to everybody else. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Which side are you guys on? The pro or the against the GCD? This was a long video to make, but hopefully it gave you guys a little bit of an insight of what the hell is going on in BFA. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in another video.